welcome back, everybody. Welcome to Project Life, the podcast where we take project management concepts and apply them to your day-to-day life. My name is George Lopez. I am the host of the show. I want to welcome all you guys back to episode number 2. In this particular episode, we're going to go ahead and try to dive right in to some of those project management concepts that I was raving about during episode 1 and kind of what I've built this show about. So if you just to kind of recap, if this is your first time listening to the show, the premise of this show is I am a project manager, and I feel that life in itself is one large project, or it's built on multiple different projects, and taking multiple phases of our lives and breaking those down into project-like tasks or goals, and being able to use what I use on a day-to-day basis to ensure that my construction projects go well, and apply that to our day-to-day lives. I feel like there's a connection there, and that if we tap into some of these things, that we can actually be better people on the other side of things. So again, my ultimate goal is that if I can help you take one or two things away from the show to apply to your life to move and progress forward, then I will say that I have won and the show has won. So as we're diving into things, guys, all right, so let me kind of break it down to you guys like this. So when we look at project management, and as project managers study and try to prepare to test for the project management professional certification, which is a global, if you don't know what the PMP is, it's a global certification for project managers, and it's a pretty big deal, and it's probably one of the hardest tests that you will take, right up there with the MCATs and things of that sort, and the LSATs as you're trying to get into law school. But for project managers, this is kind of right where we want to be in the tests that will help solidify our career, at least progress us forward on a global scale. So during the process of studying for that, they give you this nice little chart, and on this chart, it's broken down into 5 different process groups, 10 different knowledge areas, and 59 different processes across the board. So this show is going to touch on at least the 5 process groups and the 10 knowledge areas, and we're not necessarily going to dig into each and every of those subtasks. Some of them will overlap, and some of them I will combine together to touch on a really, really quick basis. But that being said, we're going to kind of take it from the start of that, and the first process group in which we're going to take a look at is the initiating process group, and that has 2 different knowledge areas that we see across this particular process group. 2 of the knowledge areas kind of hit within that. So and what I mean by all this is, as these things tend to intersect. So there's this, how it gets presented, it's on this nice little chart. It has the 5 process groups on top, 10 knowledge areas on the y-axis there, and then all the different processes groups will fall either within one of the knowledge areas and across one or more of the different process groups. So we're going to start with the initiating process group, which has project integration management and project stakeholder management. So what does all that mean, right? And that's really the goal of what we're going to do tonight, is try to get that in, break it down into some nice bite-sized chunks so we can clearly understand what's going on here, and we can then take that and see how that applies to our life. So jumping right in, so the initiating process group. So again, like I said, there's five process groups. It's the initiating process group, the planning process group, executing, monitoring, controlling, and then your closing. Okay, so initiating, obviously it's the first step to get a project up and going. So 2 things that we look at when initiating a project is looking at of a project charter and identifying stakeholders. And first, we're going to go into development of a project charter. And what a project charter is, it's really the solidification for a project and it outlines really the foundation, and it's typically will be presented or at least signed off on by the project sponsor or the owner of the project. And it comes, it outlines mostly everything, but it is pretty much the foundation of the project on what is required, what are the business needs, a brief summary of the schedule and timeline, assumptions and constraints, and there's typically a business case that is done with that. And what a business case is, for those that don't know, it's really like a nice long research paper on what the business needs are and outlining the risks, outlining everything that's involved, and then the overall goals are of the project and the benefits and or risks that come along with this project, but mainly to sell the project and looking at what the benefits of the project are and why the project is necessarily needed. So again, that sounds like a bunch of dry stuff that, someone who is a project manager like myself probably finds super, super interesting. But what does that mean for me? And for me, when I look at a project charter and I want to look at it and to see how a project charter can relate to me as normal Joe, I really look at it as our goals and foundations, right? So looking at it and putting pen to paper on what we want our goals to be. So we'll just use myself as an example. When I was going through my MBA program, when I quote unquote created my project charter, it was looking at that. It was looking at what all the requirements were. I knew what the project need was, right? And it was to get my MBA. And from there, I had to kind of outline a few things and set the foundation for this project on what was required. That required me going to the school, taking a look at the classes, taking a look at what the schedules were from that point on. And then I had to look at, what were the needs? What were my needs? What was my goal to get out of this? Why was an MBA particularly the reason for me wanting to go back to school, or the area of concentration that I want to look at for a master's program? And then taking a look at, a schedule, giving myself a schedule. Hey, I want this to be a 2-year process, 3-year process, 4-year process. And knowing myself and where I was at that point in my life, I tied it back to my military career. I had just gotten promoted to captain, and I said, hey, by the time, I'm going to take this slow and steady at my own pace, but by the time I am ready to promote to the next rank of major, I want to have my MBA done and clear, because that's one less thing that I have to worry about. And then we jump into assumptions and constraints. Okay. Obviously assumptions of time, cost, and everything, needed to be taken into account. Constraints of GPA and things of that sort. Again, just other assumptions. And then the overall investment into the business case, because then I had to do research on the different schools that I wanted to go to and take a look at which one was going to best fit my needs, and then kind of look at, hey, as a project manager, will an MBA really be the best option for myself? And kind of looking at a career path on, what do project managers typically have, and depending on what field it was, it varied. But I saw that, an MBA on top of having a PMP made myself more marketable in the end. And that was really what I was trying to focus on. But, to tie this all back in together, the charter, the project charter, when all said and done, is really setting the foundation of what the goal is and putting pen to paper to what you want that goal or that project to actually be, right? And it's really finding the ways and finding the why, right? I'm sure you've heard that from a bunch of different people over the years on finding that actual why, but putting that why down on a piece of paper and outlining, make the project look for yourself, outline it. Because if you don't outline it, you can't make the decision if that's truly the time and investment that you want to make, and if the project is actually going to be right for you. And this is for on the project management side of house, a project charter is really kind of what will convince the owner of themselves, because it takes their business partners and so on and so forth to do the business case and things of that sort, and to look at all the pros and cons and what kind of time frame that they're looking at, and those are really all the things that they look at to see before they're giving themselves and giving somebody the authority to move forward on a project, because they're looking at cost, they're looking at and this is since this is the early stages of the actual project, things are very generalized. They may look at historical documentation, they may look at different type of time frames, taking a look at the markets to see if it's the right time to make decision, and then they build all this together in a charter, and then they hand it off to a project manager once they have convinced themselves in their business that this project needs to move forward. Then they hand that off to, or they're supposed to hand that off to, a project manager. So again, wrapping that back into our what does this mean for my life? For you, it's taking the time and actually putting pen to paper and identifying the project that you want to conduct. Again, it can be a short-term or long-term project. Again, projects are temporary, so you can determine what that time frame needs to look at. But if you don't look at what is required of the project, if you don't look at the time commitment that it takes, if you don't look at what are the other requirements for that project, again, one in my mind, one of the most common projects that we do in America is obviously wanting to achieve the American dream, owning a home and having the house with the white picket fence and 2.5 kids and a dog, and living that great dream. But buying a house is a huge project for most Americans, because it's the largest investment that most Americans are going to make in their lives. So if you take that and just that alone, and you take a look at that and you turn that into a project, well, the first thing you should do is that charter to outline what that project needs to look like. You're going to give yourself at least a preliminary time frame. It's going to give you all the requirements on what you have to do and what is needed to move forward, right? Doing the research on what does the credit score need to be, what are interest rates right now, outlining it and putting it pen to paper and making that project at that point real. And that is probably more powerful than anything else that you can do when you want to move forward on a project. Because again, our mind is one thing that will stop us from doing something. But if you can actually write down your goals, and you turn those goals into projects, and you outline what those projects require, and you outline what the benefits of achieving those goals and completing those projects with good quality effort, I'm telling you, you have an opportunity to make real change for yourself and for others around you. When you look at it again, it's really putting pen to paper on what you want to do. What projects do you want to start? When do you want to start them? And why? Cannot stress that enough on the why and putting it down. If you don't put it down, it's not going to happen. It's something, the military has taught me, and they beat it into our head over and over and over again, even on something, and I'll touch on it when we actually get to that segment of scheduling. But if you don't put it on the schedule, it doesn't exist. If you don't outline the why, if you don't outline the project, then it's never gonna manifest itself into actually becoming a project. Next, guys, we're gonna jump into what I always look at as probably one of the most overlooked, but yet one of the most important process throughout any project management type situation, throughout any project. And it falls under the project stakeholder management. And in this phase of it, it's the initiating portion of it. And it's to identify the stakeholders of the project. Now, it may sound simple. Hey, the project, whoever initiated it, obviously that's the stakeholder, that's the owner. And as true as that is, a stakeholder is anyone who feels that they can be impacted by the project or are directly impacted by the project can actually be considered a stakeholder. And if you let that sink in, you realize that, holy crap, that list can become huge, absolutely huge, if you start to think on what I just said. If someone thinks that they are impacted by your project, then they can be considered a stakeholder for the project. Now, what does that mean for your life? Well, yes, I think that anyone who feels that they are impacted by your life, that you can identify them as a stakeholder. But it goes back to taking what that project is, right? So we developed a charter, and within that charter, we've understand the requirements. Okay, and I can go back to using my MBA as the example, and it's okay. Now it's time to identify who the stakeholders of this project is. And when I sat down and actually thought about it and listed them out, again, this goes back to kind of writing some things down, but listing them out. And as we talk stakeholders, and I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but when we talk about stakeholders, there's ways to handle and manage each stakeholder. But right now we're just identifying the stakeholders. And anytime you do this, honestly, sit down with yourself and think about it, focus on the project, and think about those that are impacted in your life with this project. So when I went back to school, it wasn't just the professors, it just wasn't the guidance counselor. It impacted my wife, it impacted my kids, it impacted my bosses on the civilian side. It impacted multiple lieutenant colonels and colonels, on the Army side of things, because then it became ensuring that it was a balancing act of time, because that project was, the requirements needed so much of my time per week. So people were obviously going to be impacted by that based on how the schedule was, when the dates were coming around, things of that sort. But it wasn't until I started to put the actual names of those people, I didn't really realize how big of a project that this was going to turn out to, was trying to get my MBA. Because then what happened when new stakeholders came into the picture and some left and I got a new commander, or I took a new position somewhere else, so now my boss is somewhere else. It just added to the list, right? And then even some of the outliners was, what do I put my parents down on this? Well, in this particular situation, I did have to put my parents down as a stakeholder to this, because again, it's as time became a factor, and one of the most precious resources of all being time, there were times that I couldn't have a conversation with mom and dad to catch up because I was trying to do homework and things of that sort. So again, without getting too far ahead of it, you take that project charter, which talks about the why, and now you take identifying the stakeholders, and this is the who outside of yourself is impacted, and that's how you outline your project. What does the project need to be? Why does it need to happen? What are the requirements? What are the impacts in the end state of the project? What's my time frame? And who are all the people that are going to be impacted by the project? All right, guys, that's all the time that we have for this particular episode 2. I'm glad that you guys were able to sit through with us again and go over the initiating process group, which outlined developing a project charter and identifying stakeholders. Hopefully you guys took something out of that. On, again, biggest really takeaway is putting down pen to paper as you look at your life and the projects that you want to complete. Sit down, make the charter, make the why, make the how, make the what, ask yourself the 5 W's, and then list out the people that are going to be impacted on this project along the way, and see how many more resources. This will help later down the line when we talk about how many more resources and talk about communication styles. This is, again, setting the foundation for the project within these 2 processes right here. These 2 small little processes. They seem simple, but again, it will lay the foundation for your project, not only for your job, but in life. Thank you, guys. Again, my name is George Lopez. I'll talk to you next time.